Now we will be discussing a case about the relationship of the business with the government and the how the society gets suffers or not. So, and the ethical issues related to it. This case is centered around like two friends. One has become a businessman and the other influential figure in the for sanctioning orders, and how the person wants personal favors while sanctioning certain things for the like orders for the business, and how the case proceeds from there. So, the case reads as, is it always good to have friends in politics? The case is taken from Crane and Martin. So, while reading through the case, it's very important, like when you see a case, you are able to find out again, as I was telling earlier, the key points, the triggers which give you the triggers of whether this is an ethical issue or not. So, while and that like awareness has to develop within us when we are following a particular case itself. So, while reading through the case over here, I will highlight some of the important keywords mentioned over here, which should set your thinking mind on in understanding what are the pockets of ethical dilemma. So, business deals have always been like when stocks are fairly casual in the little Greek town of Dorodoko. So, it is a little Greek town of Dorodoko, just south of Thessalonica. Since Kostas started his construction business 15 years ago, he has won a lot of contracts from the municipal authority, like the redecoration of the town hall, a new kindergarten, even a nice chunk of the new circular road around the town hall, of which kept his 20 employees busy and helped Kostas and his family to enjoy a fairly decent lifestyle. Sitting on the patio of his 18th century farmhouse and slowly watching the fumes of his Cohiba cigar vanishing into the Mediterranean sunset, he feels quite at ease, if only there had not been this meeting with Dionysus this afternoon. So, who is Dionysus? Dionysus is an old friend of Kostas from his childhood days. But while Kostas had to start working at 15 years old, building houses with his father, Dionysus had become a teacher. However, he had soon got bored, and before long he went to politics. So, you can understand Dionysus was a teacher, but he got bored with it and he soon entered into politics. For 10 years now, Dionysus has been the mayor of Dorodoko, but despite his lofty position, the two friends have continued on to get on very well. So, what they do is they normally meet once a month in the back room of the local cafe, share some ouzo and exchange gossip. Of course, this is important, they also talk about business, and knowing what is coming up in the mayoral office has and knowing what is coming up in the mayoral office has always helped Costas to tailor his bids to the municipal authorities' priorities. So, he gets to know some of the information about the mayoral office by virtue of the fact like he is friends to the mayor, and that helps him to shape his bids to the municipal authorities' priorities. So, this could again be an ethical point of dilemma, like where you can this could again be an ethical point of dilemma where you can debate about is it right to share this type of information when you're talking of maybe seeing it from the, you may tell it like though from the postmodern perspective or from the ethics of care perspective. Both of them are friends and there is nothing wrong to share an information with a friend, but again from the rights and justice perspective you can tell then others who are also maybe placing these orders, they also have the right to this information, and it is justice for all if this information goes to everyone, and this special maybe not this special preference given to Costas. So, not that Dionysus has directly pushed things for him, but among friends they talked about projects, and Costas was clear enough to integrate this information into his bids. Of course, he has known how to show his old mate some gratitude. So, when Dionysus needed something to be fixed at his house, or like it never took one of Costas' employees more than half an hour to turn up and sort it out. And when Dionysus gave a party for his 50th birthday last year, Costas took over the entire catering for 200 people, including drinks, but this was just a birthday present for his friend. So this, what is the cost involved, and questions like would you do it for all of your friends? So is it a gift really, or is it a bribe? These type of issues, because see the nature of the things done, the nature of the favor itself, like your moral impulse may be telling like this is something which is beyond the normal quantity of gift maybe that is given. But today things were different. Dionysus knew that Costas urgently needed new contracts to keep his company running, and so he mentioned the new municipal swimming pool that is about to be built. Dionysus also mentioned that the project manager from another construction company, whom he had met last Sunday after the church, had offered to build Dionysus a swimming pool in his house if the company owned the contract. Now Costas knows all too well that this has been Dionysus' dreams for years. Not that Dionysus had asked for anything, but there was a funny tone about him telling Costas of his little chat about the pool. Costas could easily fiddle the bills for labor and materials in such a way that the small swimming pool in a private house could be hidden in the project of the dimensions of the tendered municipal one. But after all, wasn't that taking things a little too far? On one hand, there is his employees and their families. There is not much other work in the pipeline. And doing a favor for an old mate here and there can't be a crime. Plus, Dominus is ultimately in charge of a lot more future projects. On the other hand, so this is the point of dilemma, like when he's trying to decide like whether this is going too far, like so he's in the point of understanding, so to who, like whether to go for this contract or not, because on the one hand he finds like these employees are there, their families are there, he is responsible to them, they are not other work which is there, so this contract is really very important for them, and doing a small favor to a friend may not be a crime. Plus, Dionysus was responsible, he has the political power of giving sanction to lot more future projects, so this expectation is there. On the other hand, his dilemma is renewing Dionysus's roof last year's storms were already quite something he did for him. But building a swimming pool clearly is a bigger investment than any of the favors he has provided before. Then, if others get to know about it, if his employees get to know about it, like this is how the business is got, then what are they going to think? Like maybe they are not going to say anything, but if they are going to think anything differently, and what the rest of, because we have started with like it's a very small town, so mostly the people know their each other, so what other people of the Dorodoko are going to think. So the more he thinks about it, he gets more angry at his competitor for offering the swimming pool, because this brings into the stakeholder analysis when we did the competitor's role also in taking away suppliers, in taking away business by unethical practices of bribing, maybe then lowering the price, or poaching the suppliers, or defamation by advertisement. These are different ways like the competitors tries to take steps to grab the business from the other competitor. At Dionysus for being so cheeky, and at himself for having been gradually dragged into the somewhat puzzling relationship. He decided to discuss the matter with his lovely wife Cassandra as soon as she returns from her shopping trip to Thessalonica later that night. Maybe she would have some good ideas of how to sort the dilemma. So, this is the case, and the questions that are following it, of course, like what are the main issues in this case, and what are the maybe ethical arguments for or against building the swimming pool for Dionysus. So, as far as the main ethical issues in the case are concerned, so we find like this is a case which is about bribery and corruption scandals and the areas of business and politics, and however the more delicacy of this case is on that like both are friends and the friendship relationship is there. So In this case, the this deals with a bribery issue between a politician and a business person of a construction industry, and when it relates to like more so when both are friends, what is the problem. So the main ethical issues that the case includes here are, so how far does this friendship between the two old mates will reach? Where is the border between the favors and the bribery? Did Costa's favor in the past gradually create this climate of giving and accepting bribes? How far like the responsibility of Costas to his employees goes? How far should he go to live up to it? So as we can see from the case or get a picture from the case, like the municipal swimming pool will be built on bribes anyway. So what is the difference it will make, or does it make any difference? Is Costas or his competitors will build the Dionysus swimming pool? So who has to attempt to break this cycle of corruption? So as evident from the case also, we find Dionysus is in a position power and about a variety of aspects about Costas's business life. So if Costas does not build his private pool, he might be out of the game for future projects. He also might have to face other problems from the political sphere in future, such as increased scrutiny in the health and safety record of his company or the accuracy of his accounting procedures, because he was telling like this like if this municipal swimming pool is to be done and the Dionysus swimming pool is also to be done, so this can be taken into the accounts of it. So these accounting procedures may also be under scrutiny in future. So these are the possible ethical issues regarding which the dilemma are there. So ethical arguments in favor of favor for building the swimming pool for Dionysus is, both arguments could be there, yes and no. So first we'll discuss the argument in favor of, then against it. Greatest good for the greatest number of people from an utilitarian perspective. Everybody directly involved would get the benefit. Costas will get benefited in terms of getting more business, this one, and maybe for more orders in future. Dionysus will get benefited in having a swimming pool. Costas' employees will also get benefited in terms of having a continued job. The only harm that will be is for the taxpayer as the project becomes slightly more expensive, but given the fact that Costas' competitor would build the swimming pool anyway, this harm may not even be a part of Costas' decision, because whether Costas does it or not, the competitor will do it, and then even the competitor does it, the taxpayers are going to suffer. So we cannot tell like Costas will remain solely responsible for the sufferings of the taxpayers. So maybe from the feminist perspective also, Costas and Dionysus would maintain a close relationship in close relationship of friendship in future if he builds the swimming pool for Dionysus. Amongst the arguments which are against is like the is we can tell like maybe giving certain favors, it could be it's a part of friendship, but a present of this size which is clearly exceeds the boundaries, because like arranging for food for 200 people, then maybe building the roof, now a swimming pool, which is, and we find like it's gradually increasing in the quantity of money spent for these type of gifts. From a Kantian perspective, especially maxim 3 would be problematic here. So Costas is definitely not happy with the idea of his employees and the village knowing about the deal. So because though he was more okay with the previous deals, but this is what has started troubling him, because the amount appears to be much more, and investment much more than what are the favors that he is going to get, or as if it is becoming a continued process. So as Kantian principle may also suggest that giving into this temptation here might result him in falling in more deeply trapped in a circle of corruption, as now this behavior of giving favors and in return for the orders that you are getting then becomes an universal law. So the fact that he is angry about Dionysus' behavior and that he has a strange feeling about this particular step further in the relation to the mayor would hint to the fact like his moral impulse is also tells him that something would be wrong. So from the postmodern perspective, one might therefore argue that the Costas' inner gut feeling is also tells him that this is just one step which is too far. So maybe even his gut feeling is not accepting the fact that he is going to do this favor, this huge favor, in order to get the order in terms of the municipal swimming pool. So like now in this case we have discussed like whether this is situation is different, because we have discussed Dionysus is a mayor. So would situations have been different if Dionysus is a regular business customer rather than a mayor? So like maybe customer to this construction company who wants this pool to be constructed, and maybe the person who has come to negotiate wants a pool to be made in his home. So here the main difference of Dionysus being in a political role is he is not only just abusing some of the corporates' money, including a private pool in a bigger project, but he is also betraying the interest of the wider community of for which namely is the tax-paying electorate for which he is responsible. So the government has a responsibility, a dual like principal agency relationship, not only with the business house but with the society at large. So when we are discussing what is the difference between if Dionysus were a business person, customer, and when he is a political person, is the difference when the direct responsibility of the government to the society at large to think best in their interest. So when Dionysus is trying to like get a private pool constructed in between a bigger project. So he is trying to be, he is actually betraying the interest of the wider community, the trust that they have put on them to work in their best interest of the society. So, and also that Dionysus is a politician makes him more powerful than just a simple business person, because he can use his power to either reward or punish costers in other cases, areas of business as well. So if now it's left to decide, like how would you advise costers what to do? So this again you can try to see from the different ethical perspectives that is there. So and that depends on a holistic idea of your business opportunities, either what are the other possibilities that are there. So who is it possible for you to get business from other avenues? What are your responsibility to your employees? Can you tell your employees of this situation also, and jointly you involve them in the decision making also, what needs to be done? And so like maybe they agree to work in a maybe lower price also, lower salary level. So you have to work on the different opportunities maybe that you see from different angle in this case, like is it the only order that is there for you, or you can have access to other orders also if you try. So who are the other competitors present? So what is the number of employees you have? So what is your relationship with them? So can you come to some common agreement regarding, like, if this is the scenario, what you're supposed to do over here? So these type of questions may be answered from different. You can answer this from the utilitarian perspective, like we did for the toys case of doing the deal and not doing the deal. You can do that analysis of pleasure and pain. We can look into the analysis from the rights perspective and maybe the justice perspective also. So of these like inequalities which are there, the liberties which are there, and what you can do about it. And you can look from the virtues perspective also, discourse and postmodern perspectives also. So and you can take a multiple of lens together to answer to this situation. Like you can think of, like, because Dionysus is your friend, so do you think it is right to like discuss with him if the possibilities of, like, you can get the order without doing that pool also, without going for that private pool, or more so at the end of the day, when you're talking of the moral impulse, your gut, so what is that feeling that you are getting from inside, and what are the constraints under which you are making these decisions? So and the person who is making the decision, the constraints that you are in will ultimately decide like what you are going to do in this case. And the like decision taken may vary from person to person, but you may apply the different theories while answering. When you're talking of rights, it is your right to get the order if you have done it in a proper way. So you can apply justice also, like whether it is justice done to you. Like you can talk of whether the mayor is also appropriate in asking for this type of favors. So when you feel like it is no more a favor and it is becoming a bribe, and if you're not comfortable with it, then maybe you have to think of other options of because here in the case it's told like no, there is no such other work in the pipeline, but the case is not elaborated about why there is no other work in the pipeline or what efforts you have taken as Costa to do those works out, or you have also taken this as a very easy channel where you have your friend as a mayor who tells you something about what is happening in the mayor's office, and that's how you get the order. What if tomorrow like Dionysus doesn't remain the mayor and somebody else comes, then you do not have this inside information, then how you are going to survive, what you have done to look into those issues. That these type of self questions and what alternatives you have worked into and how you will survive in these type of situations will help you to come out of the trap maybe and find out other avenues of survival. But if you take that only this is the only opportunity, this is the only option left, then that may drag you towards this trap. Today maybe Dionysus is demanding a swimming pool, tomorrow he may demand something more, and maybe that is no end to it. So doing a complete analysis of the situation that you are in, the steps that you have taken to analyze that situation, find out your alternatives, will help the Costa, you means the Costa, to find out the right way how he is going to deal with this particular deal, whether he will go for the deal, will go for this bidding for this municipality swimming pool or not. Thank you.